There's something psychology has discovered about people who weren't truly loved as children, and most people completely miss it. They're often labeled as distant, overly independent, emotionally cold, or difficult to connect with. But psychology shows that these labels couldn't be more wrong. If this has ever described you, this might explain your behavior in a way no one ever has before. If you've ever felt alone even when surrounded by people, misunderstood no matter how clearly you try to explain yourself, disconnected from others, or simply out of place in the world, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. In many cases, it means your brain adapted to an environment where emotional safety wasn't guaranteed. Psychology shows that people who weren't loved consistently as children often develop higher awareness, deeper emotional processing, and stronger internal standards than the average person. That difference doesn't weaken you. It reshapes you. One of the first traits psychology consistently finds in people who grew up without feeling emotionally loved is a deep intolerance for fake or shallow behavior. When love was unpredictable or conditional, your brain learned early to read between the lines. You became sensitive to tone, intention, and emotional authenticity. Research on self-awareness shows that as people become more psychologically aware, their tolerance for inauthentic behavior drops sharply. That's why small talk feels exhausting to you. That's why forced smiles and surface-level connections feel draining. You'd rather be alone than emotionally exposed in a space that feels false. This isn't avoidance. This is self-protection learned early. Another trait that develops is a strong preference for depth over quantity in relationships. People who weren't loved as children aren't avoiding connection. They're avoiding shallow connection. Psychology shows that individuals who lacked emotional attunement early in life often crave meaningful, emotionally real bonds later on. You don't want endless social circles. You want understanding. You want conversations about thoughts, emotions, patterns, psychology, and meaning. When interactions stay superficial, your nervous system disengages. Not because you don't belong, but because the connection doesn't reach the level your mind and heart require. There's also a significant nervous system difference at play. Psychology refers to this as deep processing or heightened sensitivity. Your brain processes more emotional and social information than most people realize. Growing up without consistent emotional support forced your mind to stay alert. You learned to read moods, anticipate reactions, and analyze emotional shifts to stay safe. As an adult, this means social interaction costs you more energy. You pick up on subtle cues others miss. You analyze words, tone, pauses, and intent all at once. Research shows that people with this wiring need more recovery time after social interaction. For you, solitude isn't isolation. It's regulation. People often misunderstand your independence as emotional distance, but psychology shows it's the opposite. You learned early not to rely on others for emotional stability because support wasn't always there. Over time, this developed into low dependence on external validation. You can sit alone with your thoughts. You can problem solve independently. You don't need constant reassurance to feel grounded. This makes you seem distant to some people, but in reality, it's a form of psychological strength built through adaptation, not neglect. Trust also works differently for you. People who weren't loved as children usually develop a much higher trust threshold. Psychology shows that once emotional trust is broken early in life, the brain becomes cautious and selective. You don't rush into connections. You observe. You watch consistency over time. You test whether words match actions. You value emotional safety over access. This doesn't mean you don't want closeness. It means you understand the cost of giving your inner world to the wrong person. Here's where most people get it wrong. They see your distance and call it coldness. They see your silence and call it awkwardness. They see your independence and call it detachment. Psychology sees emotional regulation, depth of thought, heightened awareness, and a strong internal identity shaped by early experience. Your mind isn't broken. It's selective. It learned to survive before it learned to relax. Sometimes the people with the strongest inner worlds walk alone for a while. Not because they can't connect, but because they refuse connections that feel unsafe, shallow, or conditional. You're not behind in life. You're not antisocial. You're not emotionally defective. You're operating on a different psychological frequency shaped by what you had to learn early. The traits that made you feel invisible or different as a child are often the same traits that create clarity, emotional intelligence, and inner strength as an adult. In a world that rewards noise, constant validation, and surface-level connection, depth will always feel lonely. But it is also powerful. If this felt personal, comment "This explains me" below. And if you want psychology content that explains your personality in ways school never taught you, subscribe to your hidden psyche, because the next video might reveal something about yourself you've never realized.